I'm going to see if I can weave a few different topics together. And actually, they're completely interconnected and interrelated. And that is, I was reminded of the saying again yesterday that the greatest journey you will ever take is 9 inches from your head to your heart. So that in and of itself is a journey. I also want to talk about doing versus being, and not just the masculine versus the feminine, not versus masculine and the feminine, but I was reflecting upon this over the last couple of days and then was reminded about it by Zach Bush, listening to him on a podcast. And it's really about the wounded masculine. It's not about the masculine, it's the wounded masculine that we need to look at. And it's been so overused, but the patriarchal culture and society that we've been living in for thousands of years, the deification of the mind, the deification of doing and busyness and stress, and really coming into balance means that we need to heal and reframe these aspects of ourselves. And the pathway to that is by taking that journey from our head to our heart. And really the motivation for our actions need to come from a heart-centered place. So I'm going to try and talk about all those things today. This is Corinne Bloom, and you're listening to Raw Conversations. So many things to talk about. I do, on a side note, want to do a separate podcast on the feminine and the masculine within us, because I've had it come up with several female clients of mine that, women have kind of been taught to step into the world through, the wave of feminism that came out of the 70s and 80s, which was really actually more about stepping out into the world as men, still taking on that very masculine archetype. And a lot of women are kind of suffering from connecting to their inner feminine, and most especially in relationship, but just, in any part of life. And equally on the other side of that, I think men are really suffering with understanding what is their masculinity, because the masculine has been so, it's really been attacked, because we've heard so much about the toxic masculine, and then taking otherwise actually really positive masculine traits and vilifying them and demasculating men and kind of over-feminizing them. And so we're really losing the polarity in relationship, and we're losing the gifts of what not just the masculine and the feminine offer us, and how when we bring them into balance, we can really connect to our wholeness. But we're losing the gifts that men and women, what we can offer one another and the world. And that's a whole other kettle of fish with all of this kind of homogenization, I'm going to say, of gender and identity. And I don't want to go into that today, but I'm going to place that, that's what I'd like to go into in another podcast. So yeah, tune in for that at some point. But part of all of that stems from this it's not just that we've been in an over masculine society, but we've been in a really wounded masculine. Because anytime that we disconnect and sever ourselves from a part of ourselves, we're not going to be in wholeness, we're going to be in fragmentation of ourselves. Equally, if we deify the mind and stay within the realm of the mind alone, that is the most important and most powerful part of who we are, and it's the God of our being, we're going to just inherently be thrown off balance, because that's not true. It's not our only center of intelligence. There's also the heart and there's the gut, which are considered the 3 brains and the 3 centers of intelligence, and also the 3 centers of identity, if you want to look at the Enneagram. So this is also why I did a podcast on why I don't necessarily like the term mental health, because again, it's over focusing on one aspect of ourselves, the mind. And our health is not just mental. It is in part mental, absolutely, but it's also emotional and spiritual and physical. And we've got to start looking at ourselves holistically. We've got to look at life holistically. And this is bringing bringing ourselves into balance through the masculine and the feminine. And, the analogy that I've shared that Indigenous people use is like bringing, a bird that's been flying with one wing. That's how we've been as a society for thousands of years. And we need the second wing to bring us into an equilibrium and equanimity, balance, harmony, right? So this journey, I love that saying. Yeah, the greatest journey you'll ever go on is 9 inches between your head and your heart. I need to go into the details of this, but there's science-based proof that the mind is, just like I said, is only one center of intelligence, and that our heart is actually immensely powerful, but it's also equally a processing center. It just processes our emotions, and our mind is kind of makes sense of things after the fact. And so it's really important to work with the mind so that it's processing things in a healthy way. But actually, our first point of experience is through the body, felt sense, and through our emotional response to the experience that we're having. And so doing talk therapy alone and analysis alone isn't really going to complete the healing process, because a huge aspect of it is missing, which is the emotional process, which is done through the heart. So this video that I was watching, and forgive me, I don't remember the name of the man that was speaking, but he was saying if you're having a conversation, your heart is processing one thing and your mind is processing another thing. And I guess it's for us to be able to do the inner work to understand how those two, centers of intelligence or processing centers, how they can work together. So they're not at odds, but they're actually really in harmony and in community with each other, if that makes sense. They're working together. And I think actually our body innately wants to work together. We're made up of all of these various systems, and the microbiome alone, if you listen to Zach Bush, is just like immense. And like, I can't even put words to it. It's so complex. Or if you listen to the work of Bruce Lipton, our whole being is made up of trillions of communities, communities of cells and bacteria and all of these things. So anyway, I don't want to get into the technicality of it, but the whole point is that I really believe that we innately want to be collaborative. And that's both the biology of who we are, the spirituality of who we are, individually and collectively. And I think we've been in such a wounded place as a collective, as humanity, and therefore as individuals, because we're going against our inner nature. If our inner nature is collaborative and compassionate, we are so going against that, because we've been taught to not collaborate, but to compete, and to really if we sever ourselves from very powerful parts of ourselves and we're disconnected from ourself and our heart, then how are we going to feel connected to others, right? As within, so without. So the way that we change the world is we have to, I say change ourselves, but that's not really what it is, because the thing is, if we change ourselves, that has the connotation that who we are isn't good enough and we should be a better version of ourselves. I think all of this is about returning back to our true nature and our true essence, and coming back home to ourselves. And then that just has a ripple effect on everything else. So the journey from the head to the heart is recognizing that a lot of our experience is being processed through the heart. And yet we are approaching a lot of our confusion, our healing process, our trying to figure out our lives through the mind, and through the mind alone. And so we might have a concept of something, we might have an understanding of something, but if it isn't bridged with the heart, if it's not connected to the heart, just a huge piece of the puzzle is going to be missing. And so a lot of the time, this is something that I spoke with, I've spoken about it a lot in the past, but it came up in a session today with a client, and that is when we're confused and we're trying to figure out what to do with our lives, we get very much stuck in the what, right? And that's the mind. The mind is like, what am I going to do? And that's the masculine, the overdrive of the masculine in its kind of non-divine form in a very patriarchal culture. That's like, you are measured by what you do, whether you succeed in what you do, whether you're productive. It's not coming from a healed place. So we're measuring ourselves by what we do. And so the doing is the what? What am I doing? That becomes the question. And it's really hard to answer that because that's an outside in kind of inquiry, right? We're looking immediately towards the what and the doing and the productivity and the success of that. Versus everything starts from a seed, right? You don't just have a plant that's like, plop, there it is, there's the plant. It grew from a seed through the soil, through the darkness, through the struggle of like, breaking through into the light. And then it grows and unfolds and it becomes, a flower, whatever plant it was meant to be, right? The essence of what it is was always there in the seed, but it had to begin as a seed. We're no different from that. So if we're looking at it from the outside in, from the what, as Simon Sinek would say, we actually need to ask ourselves, why? Why is the seed? And why is actually not a concept. It's not something that comes from the mind. It cannot be answered or figured out through the mind. You will try to go through the mind. You will write down lists. You will brainstorm. You will have, all of these things that are still kind of abstract and cerebral and linear. But you'll never get to the core of it because the why always comes from an emotional, feeling, sensory-based place. That is always the seed and the motivation and the inspire and the instigator of what you do has to come from a place of, why am I doing this? And am I doing this because it has meaning to me? Is it fulfilling? I think the issue or not the issue, I'm going to rephrase that. I think it's been an issue in the past, and I think it's what's happening right now that is so beautiful as people are starting to ask themselves the question, what has meaning to me? That is dropping into your heart. It's no longer coming from the mind space alone. And I'm not vilifying the mind at all. I'm just saying that when we go out of balance, that's when we go into unhealth or dis-ease, right? It's all about balance. All of these parts of ourselves are hugely powerful and important. But if we lean too much into one, just as if we lean too much into the feminine, that's going to probably create too much chaos, So it's all about the equilibrium. So where was I? This question of, does this have meaning? Where actually I'm finding that what I'm doing does not have meaning. This is empty. This makes me feel void, and I can't do this anymore because I don't want to just be doing for the sake of doing. I think that's really been the gift of what's come out of these last years through the chaos, through, things really being dismantled and broken down. And we're having to question these things that we kind of were on autopilot and just following by rote and, being good citizens and being told what to do. And actually it's like, wait a second, how does my heart feel? No, my heart doesn't feel good doing this. And that is such a powerful question to ask ourselves and a point of reflection. And as we drop into our heart, the why is the feeling. So if I use a personal example, when I was younger, and I want to preface this by saying that, a lot of people feel a lot of pressure around like, what is my purpose? And so I'm a bit reluctant to use that word because I don't want to create stress or pressure that if you don't know what your quote unquote purpose is, that something is wrong with you, because it's not. Purpose is just what makes you feel alive? What impassions you? What inspires you? What makes your heart happy? What brings you joy? It can be so many different things, and there's no right or wrong answer. And nobody can answer that question but yourself. And that question comes by tuning into your heart. But to bring it back to my experience, I did have a very clear feeling of what I wanted to do in this lifetime, which is I wanted to have a positive effect on humanity. That just from being a child was very, very clear. Now, the medium for that has changed many times over. I thought that it was as a dancer and being on stage and sharing in that energy. And so actually, when I had to stop being a dancer because of an injury, it was like an identity crisis. And as I've shared before, that's what propelled me onto my spiritual path, because I had to really ask myself, who am I without the identity of being a dancer? So I had to let go of the doing aspect. And what I found was that the essence, the why, the feeling, the heart-centered motivator for what I was doing was going back to that, I want to have a positive effect on humanity. So then that morphed into choreography, and it morphed into teaching, and it morphed into acting and singing and being a coach and leading workshops. And, so it's like the medium is just the vehicle, right? But it always underneath it, the driving force has been this, I want to have a positive effect on humanity. And the reason this is something that's come with age and wisdom is that the reason why I want to have a positive effect on humanity is not so that people can turn around and be like, oh, look at how great you are, Corinne, or look at how you've done this and that and the other. It's actually, I'm not looking for the fame. I'd like to have the reach because I want to be of service, or because I know that whenever we're doing something that is making us feel alive, which is connecting to our true authentic self and the essence of who we are, our soul, whatever you want to call it, we want to be doing that because it brings us so much damn joy. We want to feel enlivened. And so I know, I want the reach because I want to be giving this to people because it makes me feel alive. And if in turn it's supporting an individual on their path back home to themselves and discovering who they truly authentically are and feeling liberated in that, that makes me so happy. That is such a beautiful gift that I get to receive in return. And so I go back to, I think our innate nature is collaborative and compassionate and connected. We want connection with other human beings. And also we desperately, innately need connection to nature. And again, we've been so disconnected from our inner nature, from our outer nature. Humans are seen as separate to nature, which is such a fallacy. That's such an illusion. That's such a lie. And look at the consequence of that lie. And we're suffering for it. And then we're trying to kind of patch things together and quote unquote fix it by going to the mind and to the mind alone. And that is just not going to, we're not going to find the resolution that we're looking for because it's just one aspect, right? When we drop into our heart and when we really sit with, and this could be a process, right? You might need to do coaching or therapy or breath work or movement or art or meditation or inquiry or God, there's so many different avenues which you could take. But when you drop into the inquiry of really, going into your heart and going into the feeling, the sense, not the idea or just the thought, but really doing the inner work, doing the inner travel, as I refer to it. We're very good at wanting to explore the outer world. We're so curious about exploring the universe, but what about our inner verse? What about our inner world? How many countries have you been inside of yourself? But when we drop into that place and we start to see that everything is interconnected and everything needs to be interconnected in order to create harmony and equilibrium, we just drop into a very different state of being, and therefore our doing, what we do in the world, will be driven from such a different place of motivation that what we will do and create will be so different, and it will naturally and innately have meaning because it is birthed from a seed in a place of meaning. And when we drop into the heart, I think right now, because we're so focused on the mind, and when we're in the wounded masculine, when we're in scarcity, and when we're in fear, which the mind can produce a hell of a lot of fear, and then it creates anxiety. And that can propel us into so many false stories and narratives about ourselves, about life, about existence, about others, about the world. We further fragment ourselves, and we create a very unholistic reality, right? And then we go into like, well, I need to fix this to make it better, right? But it's all driven from a state of fear, where when we drop into the heart and we really hold our experience, that's what the heart is so incredible at doing, because that's where love resides. If we can hold our experience, we can hold the masculine and the feminine. We can hold our pain. We can hold our suffering. We can hold our wounds, our wounding, and not run away from them or get rid of them or fix them or see them as a problem, but actually walk towards them with love and empathy and compassion and patience and curiosity, and embrace them and bring them into our heart, bring them into the lap of love. That's how we create alchemy. And then we're coming from a place of just love. Like, it comes back to when you're doing things in the world from the why place, which is the feeling, which is from the heart, your heart will open. And when your heart opens, you naturally fall into a state of love, which is your natural state of being. And then that's what makes us feel even more alive, because it's like, I'm in the true essence of who I am, which is love. And that's a very interesting place to be, because you go into this place of like, I love everyone and I have compassion for everyone and I want to give everyone a hug, and but then the mind will come in and be like, oh no, but you were hurt, you were hurt by that person, or this society will judge you in that way, and you shouldn't do this and you should do that, and that that indoctrination, that programming comes in, and it closes our heart. It shuts us off. And part of this journey into the heart will be vulnerable. And when you tap into vulnerability and you tap into the power of vulnerability, you kind of want to just open it up and express it to everyone. And actually, a part of that journey is also understanding that self-love and self-care, that actually boundaries. I think I've talked about this before. If you've been a client of mine, you've certainly heard me talk about it. Boundaries aren't defenses. They're not hard lines. They're not brick walls. They are an act of self-love and self-care. They are the circle that you draw around yourself, or whatever you want to create a boundary around. And you're saying that what is in this is sacred, and I get to choose what comes in and what comes out. And it's love. It's love. It's not defense. It's love. And so therefore, it's also not fear. Right? Fearful boundaries create hard-walled boundaries, defenses. But defensiveness is not a boundary. Boundary is self-care. Boundaries that come out of self-love and self-care looks like, I'm not going to go to that event tonight because I can feel my body needs for me to take care of it. So I'm going to stay in and take care of myself and go to bed early. Right? So there, think of boundaries more of an act of self-love and self-care. But all of these things require us to drop into our heart. It requires us to go on that journey and to then create an alignment between the heart. Well, let's start from the top. The head, the heart, and the gut. Thought, feeling, sensing. This is really what looking at healing from a holistic perspective is all about, But again, if we're so over-identified with the mind and thinking that the mind is going to figure it all out, you're going to get stuck at a certain point because it can only go so far. That's why I say affirmations can be great, but if you just keep it in the intellect, they're just words. It doesn't mean anything. Attach it to a feeling, and all of a sudden it changes, right? We are, as often as it's been said, we're not human doings, we're human beings. And when we're in a state of being and we stay there with presence and awareness, which is what the work is all about, that's when we can begin to feel, sense, experience the aliveness of this present moment, the aliveness of our state of being, no matter what it's feeling, right? And you get out of the judgment of good or bad or right or wrong. The heart can hold anything and everything. Love can hold anything and everything. The mind might go, nope, yes, no, don't like that, right? That's what the mind can do. And that's often based on programs. So the mind is an amazing tool. It's an amazing center of intelligence. But if it's not connected to heart and gut, it can go a little bit awry. You know what I mean? So yeah, so bringing this together, it's an invitation to start to set foot upon that path, that little long journey from head to heart. And like I said, I will do another podcast about more specifically about the masculine and the feminine, both how it's embodied within women and men, within relationship, within sexuality, within our society. That is such a broad topic that I could probably talk about for hours, but I'm going to try and keep these not too long. So the invitation, wherever you are on your journey, to start that, just take a step in the direction from your head to your heart. When you're in a concept or you're trying to figure out something or you're in the what, close your eyes, drop into your heart and go into the feeling. Go into the feeling. And that might be really hard to access at first. And you might need, a guide to help you make that connection. Once the connection is there, then you can start to understand how to do it for yourself. And on that note, if you're doing this work, it is constantly evolving and unfolding, and you're going to go through periods that are going to feel like a plateau, like nothing is happening. And sometimes things take a while for them to make sense. I cannot tell you, even just in the last couple months, how I've had clients that I've worked with over time that I've said, I actually had a friend that said this as well. That's like, God, you told me something years ago. And it's like, I kind of understood it, but it didn't really make sense. And now all of a sudden it's like the penny dropped and it makes sense. And you know why it made sense to them all of a sudden? Is because they had the physical and emotional and embodied experience of it. It was no longer just a concept. It dropped into their experiential body being. And then it made sense. That's when it's like, click, I get it, right? So that's why this process cannot stay in the mind. It cannot stay in the analysis. It can't stay in the concept of it. It has to drop into the experience because we're experiential creatures. That's how we learn. That's how we gain wisdom. You can read so many books. You can listen to a bunch of lectures. Unless you go out and you have the embodied experience, it's not going to click. The penny will not drop. And you know what? If that takes time, that's totally okay. And that's totally normal. And that's totally just a natural part of this process. So trust that when you're doing this work, it's not an overnight process. But just because it feels like you're in a plateau where you're like, I'm not seeing the results, I'm not getting it, it's not quite working, it doesn't mean that nothing's happening, because a hell of a lot is happening. And you have to unravel the old patterning before you can start to feel, embody, and start to see the physical 3D effects of the work that you're doing and the new identity that you're building and the coming back home to yourself, and what that feels like. And a client of mine said this today, and forgive me if I shouldn't say this, but I just loved it so much. I'm not naming names, so there's no way that they're identifiable, but I love this so, so much because it just speaks to the point so well. It's like everything is the same, but it's totally different. And I fucking love that so much, because that's like the beautiful paradox of life. And that's what this inner work does, is that you're in the same reality, right? Everything is kind of still the same. But when you do this inner work and you go through these levels of revelation, everything becomes different, because how you perceive it and how you experience it is what is different. The reality is neutral. The experiences are neutral. What's not neutral is how we respond or react to it, how we perceive it, how we engage with it. That's what comes through our beliefs, through our traumas, our wounding, our desires, our hopes and dreams, our fears, our insecurities. All of that paints the color of our reality. And the point is not to come to such a neutral place that we're apathetic, but the point is to come to that place where I can see things through a clear lens, and I can observe things as they are, and I can equally simultaneously observe how I'm responding to that, or the feelings that it's evoking, or the fear that it's evoking in that moment, or the inspiration that it's evoking in that moment. All of a sudden, we become the bird's eye view. We can see the macro and the micro simultaneously. We can see our experience and the other's experience. We can see the present moment and the future moment. It's like, this is the holistic view. We can hold everything under the umbrella of awareness. And that awareness becomes so much more accessible and easier to tap into when we drop into the heart, because the heart, from a vibrational standpoint, is massive. It is so strong. Like the megahertz on that is huge. And when they've scientifically proved this, the space, the energy that is emitted and how vast that is, it's massive. It can be felt beyond. That's why you can do remote healing, right? There is no space and time when it comes to the heart, the vibration of the heart, and most importantly, the vibration of love, which, I think I've spoken to this a few times now. When you do the practice of loving kindness, metta, you are sending that vibration of love across the world, across the universe, and then get into like string theory and, quantum entanglement. Everything is interconnected, right? But this is the beauty of getting out of the fragmented perspective of just the brain, or just the left brain, or just this or just that, or we've got to look at it holistically. And that's what's going to change our world. But most importantly, that's what's going to alchemize us into the beings that we really, truly are. Because we're not living as our whole selves. We are whole. We're not broken. We're not, we are whole, but we've got to remember what wholeness feels like. And the path to doing that is to bring and embrace all of the various aspects that we've fragmented and compartmentalized and separated, and bring them together under one roof, which is the home of our being. So I'm going to leave you with that. A lot to take in. As always, take what feels right and what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, or allow that to be a point of reflection and contemplation and curiosity. And thank you as always for tuning in and loving you from afar. You've been listening to Raw Conversations with Corinne Bloom. Thanks so much for showing up, listening in, and being a part of the conversation with me.